Hello, and welcome to Deep Impact, a proud member of the Duff Network where we dive deep into Wildbow's most nice and accurate work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back to talk about Mala Fide 10.6. So we left Mala Fide 10.5 with Blake having to choose between his two favourite people, except he hates one of them, and so I don't know why it's a hard choice.
Yeah, well, the chapter opens with the whole dilemma kind of rephrased as Mags and Molly on one hand, my friends on the other.
Yes, which...
and like, Rose's name is sort of tactically left off the list. I can't help but think that maybe Wildbow saw the massive, like, skew in the comments on the last chapter and decided that he needed to remind all of us that it's not just Rose in the house.
So here's my little question for you, Elliot. Do you think that when he says my friends on the other, he's including Rose or excluding her and not even mentioning her?
I can't decide. I think
like,
probably
he doesn't say
the latter.
My friends and Rose on the other.
Yes.
He says
which would have
friends.
been... Yeah, my friends and Rose would have been like, yep, fair. Like, that's sort of where he is. Whereas now it's left a little bit ambiguous because he can't seem to make up his mind about her this arc.
True.
I mean, yeah. But, yeah, sorry. So the main chunk of this opening bit is really, for me, Blake has this big sort of internal monologue about wanting to change his patterns. Like, he sort of ruminates on how his trust my gut approach that he used for the first 7 arcs gave him a lot of momentum, but not necessarily in a good direction.
Yeah.
And so he does seem determined to try and do things a bit differently. Like, he doesn't just go with his gut instinct of running around breaking windows.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is something that I think was explicitly called out in
the drains, yeah.
Yeah, 9.5 or thereabouts. And it's good to see Blake sort of finally embracing his right-handedness more than the left. It's great. And it you know, this is obviously, we've talked about a lot. This arc has been all about Blake sort of coming to terms with the change he's undergone. And this is him sort of consciously working it into his behavior a bit more.
Yeah. Obviously he does some mirror shenanigans later on in this chapter in this little fight scene, but he doesn't seem to be... He seems to be kind of in control of stuff. He seems to kind of have settled a lot more throughout this chapter than he had earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to read out a line here. The line is, "She'd recovered. I didn't recover so much as I changed. Those changes led down a road. If I'd lost something, there was no guarantee I could replenish it." Talking about Rose here. And this is just we kind of remember Blake being a bit invulnerable to physical damage, which of course we kind of know why that is, because he patches it up with glamour. Or spirits or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, whatever he had on hand, basically. Yeah. Wax, spirits,
wax,
glamour, who cares? He's not fussy.
Yes. But I like that this now kind of re-emphasizes for us, no, damage is back on, no more God mode, because actually you're not recovering, you're just covering it up.
Yeah, there's really a sense that he's a fuse, and yeah, there's no going back. I mean, the interesting thing is he talks a lot about how Rose recovers. Has she? Like, how do we know she's not going through the same shit as Blake? Like,
true.
I mean, you know, I'm just still tinfoiling. Like, he doesn't know this. But yeah, I mean, I do like this sort of little bit. Also reminds us of Rose's like mirror abilities, because he sort of specifically references just a few lines after this. I think the bit in the station where she put her arm out the window.
Yes, which obviously pays off later in this chapter.
Yeah, so it sort of reminds us of that, and then also, of course, reminds us that he's a ticking clock now when it comes to, you know, copping damage.
Yes, he's, he really is not doing so hot. I liked, there was a note in your live read where you called out that he had the hyena sword still stuck into his hand, and that just seemed to be like a permanent thing now.
Yeah, he doesn't even seem bothered by it. Like, he's just like, good thing I have those basically permanent holes in my hands.
Yep.
You know, so that nothing, you know, the sword can't slide out. And it's just like, you have fucking holes in your hands? Like, I forgot. Or I don't think we'd realize quite how permanent those are. Like, that's, there's just a part of him that is so chill about these physical changes that are going on to him. Like, I mean, I guess it does seem like that has utility as long as he's got the hyena, but He's got Swiss cheese hands now. Like, I don't know,
Yeah.
that's weird. He should be more
Yeah,
freaked out by this.
yeah.
I'm on Green Eyes' side.
No, it's true because and this is kind of, continuing that theme of just like, yeah, you're kind of too cool with just how freaky you are now, Blake.
Yeah, he's really he's just rolled with it like a lot.
Yeah. So Blake thinks about Mags and goes to warn her, but she is basically on the way to Hillsglade House. So it's a bit ambiguous. We end the last chapter with him thinking, "Oh, I have to make a choice," and it is a bit ambiguous what he chooses, or even if he chooses here.
Yes, the way the chapter plays out, I almost had the impression that the plan sort of became just run and tell both of them and play it by ear when I'm there.
Yeah.
Because he sort of goes to the house, but he is thinking that he'll go to Mags next, and then he ends up, having to go to Mags first and ditching her. So it's kind of seems like he just didn't really make the choice.
Yeah. He does stop by Hillsglade House on the way, though. He doesn't just skip it, which I guess is making a choice. And on the way, he sees a few people, including Johannes, Faisal, Sandra, and some others, all kind of converging on one spot to have a little impromptu meeting, which is a great kind of escalation of just Johannes and Sandra are seemingly working together on this. So Mags has really fucked up.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of immediately sells it as like, this is a big deal, that everyone's gathering, especially considering Mags is normally the glue that holds them all together.
Yeah.
So it's, it's a big deal.
Yeah. I'm still a little curious on what Blake would have done if he was able to get into Hillsglade House. Like, I'm assuming he would have still gone on to talk to Mags, but it's ambiguous. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Rose would have let him stay long anyway, so
True.
Probably a moot point. But yeah, I agree. I think he would have been like, "Hey, FYI, Jeremy's coming. It's bad. I got to go tell Mags."
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that's the impression I got of what his plan was. But Blake plans, they're not really set in stone,
or set at all.
Yeah. I also just wanted to call out that like Blake goes on again another little thought tangent about the stores in town that he passes on his way to Mags. And, sort of talking about how some are old and shitty, and then there's, like, mixed in these really new and expensive ones, and he doesn't really understand how or why that works, which is interesting, because, like, obviously, I live in, like, rural Australia, and we have the same thing here. Like, this almost describes, like, the main mall of my town to a T. So I'm now worried about what's going to be happening here over the next few months, because there's clearly going to be a battle for lordship. This is the only explanation.
Yeah, I like that Blake's explanation is it must be Johannes's influence kind of making some more well-off people start to settle here, because I don't know what else it could be, which is interesting. I guess gentrification is a part of Spirit's influence, In Pact.
Yeah, I mean, that would, like, it's that whole thing where the spirit and the real world reflect each other.
Yeah.
God, I'm using that word so much it's losing all meaning. Yeah. But, yeah, exactly. So as the town goes on the up and up, so do the civilians.
Yeah. So Blake finds Mags, and Mags is obviously kind of saddened that the town seems to be moving against her, but kind of was expecting it when she decided to take Molly as a familiar. She basically says to Blake, hey, you can't really help much here, so you might as well just go try and help Rose, where you might actually be useful. I'm just going to try and, argue my case, take my lumps, but fight it where I can.
I love Mags so much. Like, what a battler.
She's good, isn't she?
She's just so noble.
Yeah.
I mean, I love when Blake first arrives on the scene. There's this quote that I just want to read out where he says, I couldn't see Mags's face from this angle, but her posture was bent, as if she had a weight on her shoulders. A pity. I'd hoped she'd recover a bit, facing down her demons. Had I, facing down Carl? And, I mean, I just love how this thought relates to all the stuff we're talking about, especially in this arc, but overall in the whole story of Pact, about, like, change. Because, I mean, at least in my experience, having these sorts of epiphanies or actually confronting these things doesn't just make them go away, like Blake sort of realizes when he thinks about Carl. It kind of helps you and helps you establish patterns to get around them, but it doesn't just mean like, oh, I confronted that, like, check.
Yeah, check that box, and now I'm well again, yeah.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
Can't just kind of, you can't just confront your fear or, do immersion therapy and then it's like flicking a light switch,
Yeah, like confronting your shit is tough, and this is sort of Blake having to remember that as he's going through it on a very large scale, because this is fantasy, so it's not just normal shit. He's got like normal shit times 1,000.
Yes, it's like supernatural trauma, right?
Yeah,
which I guess is a theme for Wildbow. So again, kind of we see Mags be sad, reflecting on Sandra and how Sandra is now an enemy. Mag says she wasn't an enemy, which is interesting because she doesn't call her an ally, which presumably is because she thinks that would be a lie.
Well, I mean, also she was meant to be the neutral party. It wasn't technically it wasn't allowed to be true.
Yeah, fair enough.
Up until now, but yeah, I agree. Like her and Sandra had not a friendship, just sort of some sort of connection or relationship that was hard to define, but it was a positive one. I mean, Sandra really helped her out in Signature. Yep. Like, I can see why her standing with Sandra would be important to her. I think that really meant a lot when it happened. So
yeah, and all of last arc was Mags using that pen, ink trick to test the strength of connections. Yeah, or the arc was it? It was the arc before last. Sorry,
chapter
before last. Which obviously is kind of demonstrating that Mags really has kind of gained some influence from Sandra. So it is sad to I don't know, to have that be lost.
I mean, and so I'm kind of assuming he's right at this point, but Blake doesn't actually have any confirmation that they are going after Mags yet, right? Like he doesn't know this for sure. He's assumed it and rolled with it, and I think he's probably right. But like walking around saying, because his response to Mags saying she wasn't an enemy is him saying she is now, and it's like, I don't know if you should be throwing around definitive accusations
Maybe
like
that's a bit too
this.
Absolute, yeah.
So I don't know, risky behavior from Blake when he's trying to keep that shit under control.
Yeah, fair. We get an interesting beat that Mags tells Blake that his presence is making Molly worse. Which we don't really know explicitly why. Possibly because they are related, or possibly because their other powers kind of interact with each other in an interesting way. Whether that's Molly kind of feeding off ambient negativity, or Blake giving off negative energy, or both, or some mix.
Yeah, maybe we've had so many auras in this story. Maybe Blake has developed like a fuck the universe aura. I wouldn't blame him.
I mean, we know that when Blake got kind of doused with Poe's radiation, he had that kind of vibe of giving off negative energy. Maybe that's really just kind of stuck with him more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just sort of. I think it is kind of the radiation, or just the vibe he's giving off. Like, I don't know if it's as well defined as like a conquest aura or Poe's aura. But it also is definitely something to do with him and Molly. Like, he's definitely sort of feeding her somewhat. I wonder, like, as I'm saying this, I'm wondering, we have noticed in the last few chapters he is feeling a bit less, boogeyman rage monstery. Like, I wonder if Molly's actively eating that part of him. Like, that would be
interesting.
That would be convenient for Blake, at least.
Yeah. Interesting. I think another piece to the puzzle is we know that for example, Jeremy's satyrs smelled Blake, and he smelled of abyss, leaving behind that lingering, sense, which presumably means that maybe he's got some kind of abyss radiation that's fucking with Molly.
Yeah, I mean, the more the satyrs talk about smell, the less I think they mean it in the traditional human sense.
Yes.
So, yeah, like, that would make sense to me. Like, I think he's definitely giving off a bit of an aura, or just, he's just got some stank on him, like after he saw Pose. But, I think in Molly's particular case, it may be something to do with the sort of remnants of a familial bond that caused her in particular to latch onto it so much.
Maybe there is some kind of phantom connection between them that is allowing negativity to breed.
Yeah.
So Blake kind of starts to leave Mags and Molly to their own devices. And as he does, there's this kind of shockwave of energy. Something big has happened, and it smells like wine. A big old wine fart passes over the town. And Blake obviously knows something's going up at Hillsglade House. Wine equals Jeremy, so he runs off to the
Yep.
house and finds Jeremy has done something to bust down the door and starts getting inside.
I love the writing when this shock wave hits. Like right from the get go, you just get a sense of how monumental this is, because the first mention of it is Blake sort of pausing as if he has a premonition, and you're like, a premonition of what? And then there's just this massive description of this shockwave that like touches every cell in his body. It's such an oh fuck moment. It's pretty great. And then obviously after that we get the reveal that part of this is that there's we've just been talking about auras. There's a drunk aura. Now like there's a like Jeremy's god has an effect of just making you feel a bit tipsy.
Yeah.
And I mean, presumably a little bit horny. I mean, Blake doesn't get that, but he's not really in the situation to really be feeling that end of it.
Yeah.
But I imagine there's probably a bit of that. But it's just, this is a really fun concept. Like, we've had such negative auras in the story up until now be explicitly defined. So just to have one that's just kind of a silly concept. It's like, yeah, Blake's going to get drunker as this fight goes on. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. I like that. There's this beat where Blake kind of feels a little rejuvenated by this aura for a moment. And on first read, you're kind of like, what is this? But I kind of have chosen to interpret it as he's already started getting a little bit drunk and he just feels a little bit lighter because of it.
Yeah. I mean, could be both. Like, I think you're probably right. Also, just before we leave, Mags, as Blake rushes off, I wanted to call out one last line, which is as he leaves, he says to Molly, if you need help, just call me. And Mags responds, what if you need help? And Blake just thinks, but I was already gone, too far away to answer the question. And I mean, if that just isn't Blake to a fucking T, like he, but Blake, what if you need help? No, can't hear you. I'm already running off into danger. Thank you.
See you later. Let me know if you need help, but I'm out of here. Yeah, definitely. It's a good read. A good live tweet.
Vintage Blake.
So first thing to talk about here is Jeremy has violated like the one place that was safe. He's just totally fucked it up. Which is great. I mean, Jeremy is not an imposing threat. The only thing we've actually really seen him do that was imposing was he kind of won/stalemated a fight against Isadora. But this is something that like the Behames couldn't even really do. They kind of fooled their way around it. This is something that even Conquest seemed possibly unable to do. It was like kind of up in the air whether he would even be able to access some of this stuff. This is pretty big.
Yeah, I mean, even though Jeremy basically told us it was coming last chapter, it still feels so huge and unexpected.
Yeah.
Because I mean, this is something that's been drilled into us from the beginning of the story. I mean, if we want to talk about how Arc 10 is reflecting Arc 1 a lot, 1.2 was all about getting to the house because it's safe from everything, and so much of the story it's always been Hillsglade House is pretty much safe from anything, and so it really throws us for a spin.
Yeah.
I mean, and Blake has been unable to get in, and since he got banished, so it's been such an impenetrable place. It really throws you for a spin that Jeremy just sort of walked up and got it smashed open, and not just like the power of it's really felt by the fact that he didn't just smash the door open, but the whole house like looks like it's been hit by an earthquake from the descriptions.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. The other thing I love is the henchmen that he has with them. I mean, we've obviously had descriptions of the satyr and his his. I'm not going to call them the cabal. I don't know what to call them. His
coterie is
his
the
harem.
word of the story.
Yeah, his coterie. There we go. We've had descriptions of them before, but we kind of are introduced to them through Blake's eyes here, and they're all like super beefy. One of the satyrs is like super jacked. One of the maenads has this huge snake that it's carrying around. Like, they're very beefy henchmen, which I think is another great way of being like, hey, yeah, these people that were kind of like creepy but not necessarily threatening before, except in a big group, they're all actually quite imposing, so be careful.
Yeah, he's really brought all the big guns, and it's really impressive.
Yeah. And the final thing that sorry, were you gonna?
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, like, as we sort of already touched on, we've been waiting this whole story for Jeremy to really show us why he's actually a contender for the Horde of Toronto. He's never really felt like it,
Yeah.
and we're finally really seeing it here. Like, it's not just that one move by his god, but all these people and the equipment he's gotten. Like, he's pretty, decked out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he kind of has this lifetime of small gifts that has built up, right? And now he seems quite powerful when he needs to be. So the other thing that I kind of noticed, I'm not sure what to make of this, is that Blake in the mirror has always kind of, now he seems to be able to spot kind of see through defenses or see through like facades a lot more than he used to. He's kind of very easily able to like recognize the satyr for what they are and kind of see through their masks almost immediately. Which not that it was impossible for him to do in the real world. It just seems that he's kind of from the mirrors is able to do that a lot more effectively, and I'm not quite sure what to make of that.
Yeah, like, because there's so many factors. Like, it could be the recent changes he's undergone. It could just be, like, aside from that, him sort of growing in his ability to notice that sort of stuff. Maybe those two things aren't separate.
Yeah.
Or, like, maybe it's a thing in the mirror world, if these things are sort of putting on, not quite glamour, but, if it's sort of when they're in the presence of humans, they're putting on these sorts of things. Like, we know goblins go out of their way to avoid being in your field of view and stuff. Maybe this sort of ties into that, and because he's in the mirror world, and because he's not a person, they don't sort of switch the effect on or have the effect switched on for them.
Yeah, that would make sense to me, I think. So Jeremy and his apostles start to dig through the house, and they come to the library where the hidden entrance is, and they start to find it. And so Blake realizes, okay, it's time to get involved here. He does some little mirror tricks to cut up this snake that the big Maynard is carrying, and makes her very angry.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's interesting because he reaches through the mirror, and this is something we saw Rose only do very rarely, and it usually took like pretty extreme circumstances for her to even be able to do it, at least as far as she made out. So, is this Blake actually being more powerful than we think, or is this him just racking up injury debt? I guess stay tuned to find out.
We kind of touched on last chapter Blake feeling a bit overconfident, but he's obviously he seems capable and relatively powerful here, right? I mean, he's able to hold his own against, he escapes from a bunch of these henchmen, but he also does some damage. And I think the answer lies in some of the beats that we've been hitting this chapter, right? We hit the beat of Blake being worried about racking up damage. We hit the beat later on of Jeremy being contrasted to Rose in that the more power they spend, the more it costs them. I think that's what we're talking about here. I think Blake is expending power and it is costing him. But we don't quite see that cost yet.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't be the first time or
and it won't be the last.
The 100th time.
Yeah. So Blake has cut up this snake, and as a result, the head Maynard is very angry at him and kind of chases him. He basically darts through different reflections around the house, and the Maynard is able to keep up with him quite fast. But eventually, the kind of wine fog dulls him enough that he starts to slow down, and he's almost caught before he dives behind Jeremy, who ends up having to call off the Maynard for kind of risk of hurting the entire team.
Yeah, that was such a good plan, trying to get it to accidentally hit Jeremy. It's a shame it didn't work out. I thought it was a good one.
Yeah.
Although not really a shame. I don't want Jeremy to get hurt too bad.
Yeah.
I mean, even though he's the bad guy right now, I guess, I still like him.
I wouldn't say he's the bad guy. I'd say he's
a
bad guy.
That's very fair. Yeah, and I mean, it's also fun seeing Blake under attack in the mirror world, while or not by something that can get into the mirror world.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like a big thing we've seen a lot in this arc is that the mirror world isn't actually that safe, really. Like, it seems like a lot of things can interact with it.
Yes. I like the idea of, even if something can't enter the mirror world, like some of the monsters we've encountered can, even just kind of denying Blake access to things is basically a counter to him in the way that what's her face, the kind of troglodyte other that was summoned by Rose
Midge.
back in Midge, that's it. I kept wanting to call her Marge. That even in the way that Midge was able to kind of deny Rose access to her, and that was enough to stop Rose for a serious amount of time. We're seeing the reverse of that with this Maynard and Blake.
I was actually just thinking of Midge as well, because, like, you know, Midge thought of this as a tactic, so I don't think it's exactly like a big brain play.
It's pretty easy to figure out, yeah.
Maybe I'm underestimating Midge, but she didn't really strike me as a tactician.
No.
So, yeah, I mean, you know, the Mirror World isn't that great, really. I don't know. Should have taken Faisal's offer.
I mean, I agree. So this Maynard is like very fast, right? And you kind of get the picture that, I mean, this is the leader of the Maynard, so apparently, you know, you can assume that it's probably the strongest, but it doesn't seem like there would be that big of a difference between this one and a bunch of Jeremy's henchmen, of which he has, you know, several.
Well, it kind of seems like the rest of them aren't getting involved just because, like, they're like jeering her and stuff. Like, it's just like, you know, it feels more like two people getting in a fight at a frat party.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely doesn't feel like they need to step in. Like, they're like, yes, you've got this.
Yeah, they're just cheering her on. It's just like, yeah, go. Like, you know, they don't feel the need to help.
Yeah, which indicates to me, like, I mean, probably they're a bit overconfident in relation to Blake, but also they're obviously strong enough that they don't need to worry about a lot of shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I kind of like I like Dionysus's followers for this.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they're very easy to underestimate because you just assume that they're around drinking and having orgies and stuff all the time. But you know, actually they're pretty powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, you can have orgies and be powerful is the moral of this chapter.
Yep.
So, you know, Jeremy has called off the Maynard, and so he kind of just talks to Blake here, and ends up kind of trying to convince Blake why he shouldn't interrupt, which is interesting. And it's Jeremy really in his element, right? He's incredibly convincing here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to talk about here, but I agree. It's good to see Jeremy sort of stretch his practitioner muscles, especially considering half of his speech here is how he doesn't really have to use them most of the time. So, yeah, I think one of the first things I wanted to talk about here is there's a bit where Blake is trying to warn him about Barbs upstairs, and Blake says, of the two abstract demons I've met, both followed the same minor rule. If you see it in a reflective surface, like, you know, it can come out and kill you.
Yep.
And I mean, I hadn't actively made that sort of connection, but it's true. I mean, you know, we were just talking about how a lot of things can interact with the mirror world, but it's interesting how even like it does seem to be a recurring theme in demons. Like it just got me thinking about the mirror world in general. Like we know so little about it. Like the vestige world is seemingly everywhere, and so many things can interact with it. It's tied to these demons, as we just sort of explicitly called out there. I'd also argue you could sort of tie it to angels through Johanna's. So, like, yeah, I think we skipped over some notes last chapter accidentally, but I'd written some stuff about how, like, the mirror world seems to be halfway between the spirit world and the mortal realm. Because, you know, Blake talked a lot about how things only stayed when he, like, you know, put conscious effort into putting them there, which reminded me of the spirit world mechanic.
Yep.
Back in Arc... God, was that only Arc 7? Feels so long ago.
Something like that.
Yeah, so, I don't know. I'm interested to see, hopefully we get more details on where the mirror world fits into the various layers of dimensions in the Pactverse, because it does seem to fit this interesting slot where a lot of things can access it, and it means different things for each one.
Yeah, I would be all for kind of defining some of these realms a bit more, but I actually kind of like that it's a little bit of an unknown which things can fit into which, you know, realms, if you want to call them that. I think it gives you this interesting vibe of, it's always surprising when something enters the mirror world, right? Like, it's always, it always feels like a surprise that, oh, this thing can do it, oh, that thing can also do it, oh, but that thing can't. It's kind of interesting. It adds this level of, like, I don't know, dynamicness to some of these fights.
No, I agree. I think that is a strength. I'm not looking for a, like, complete explanation, but Even like one of my favorite little bits of world building we've gotten recently was right at the start of Signature, where Buttsack was talking about the different theories on the origin of goblins. Like maybe just some of that stuff. Like
Yeah, that would be
just
fun.
some generic ideas and theories about what the mirror world means to the various peoples of this universe.
For more info on that, you can check out Doctor Strange, I believe. So Blake and Jeremy are talking, and Blake is kind of talking about Barbie and how close Barbie is to kind of being freed, and possibly Barbie is already freed. But Blake doesn't realize this kind of makes Jeremy's argument stronger because he's made Rose drunk. And I love that Jeremy kind of realizes, like, oh fuck, I may have fucked up here. There's a demon that's already almost on the loose, and drunk Rose might make it actually on the loose.
Which Blake explicitly calls out. Blake was like, hey, you know what? This was a shit plan. And, like, if Blake is telling you that your plan's a shit plan, like, you got to feel called out.
And Jeremy basically admits it later on as well. He's kind of like, this would have been so perfect if not for this thing. Ooh.
Yeah, if not for the fact that the Diabolist might have had access to demons, which obviously she probably does. Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting thing that sort of jumped out to me here, where Blake sort of compares Barbatorum to specifically and talking about them. And I don't know exactly why, but it triggered this random thought in me that, like, we haven't seen imps anywhere yet, have we? Like that was like a big thing at the end of 7.x, is that released his 3 imps. Like, I mean, I guess it's just interesting because we've sort of moved away from Toronto and we've got like people like Jeremy here, and I just wonder, like, are these imps just fucking up Toronto? Like Jeremy said in his interlude, I'm just going to be here for a week, and I'm just picturing him like leaving now in like 6 days and getting back to Toronto, and it's just like a mess.
So, spawned 3 imps, right?
Yeah.
And then Blake went to the Abyss, and then the next we saw, something like 2 or 3 weeks later, Rose and 3 people showed up. Tiff, Tyler, and Alexis. Make of that what you will.
I didn't realize you'd taken my tinfoil hat and added it to your own.
Yeah, it's really gone off the rails since I adopted it. No. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows what's going on with them?
If First Quiet imps are running rampant in Toronto, Isadora must be miserable.
Yeah, I love that idea. Yeah, who knows what's going on with them? I mean, I'm sure we'll check in with that whole situation at some point.
Yeah. Also, everyone keeps talking up how Barbatorum is worse than which I don't. Maybe it's because he's been stuck in a circle for the entire story. I don't see it yet.
I mean, I don't
know. Wait,
is a minor demon, and Barbatorum is not a minor demon, at least.
Yeah,
as far
exactly.
As we know. So I don't know.
Like,
I mean,
maybe Rose got really lucky catching, or is better than we think, and Barbatorum can really fuck shit up given the chance.
I guess we'll maybe see Drunk Rose. We'll see.
Cool.
So Jeremy kind of explains that, hey, like. Well, it's interesting. Jeremy kind of appeals to Blake's low opinion of Rose. He talks about how she's drunk and she's affected by conquest. Like, I know you don't trust her judgment, and it's worse right now. So let me get to her, and I can stop whatever she might do.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because he starts this sort of tactic later in the conversation, and early in the conversation, there's a bit where Jeremy calls Blake the Diabolist's favored pet. And Blake is sort of like, well, you got 1 out of 3. And so I'd like to think that this is Jeremy like internalizing that information and realizing halfway through that Blake and Rose are not at all on the same page, and he starts to use it.
Yeah, I like that. It's not explicit, but it kind of hints towards Jeremy being this seemingly not incompetent, but like, I don't know, very laissez-faire and not putting in a lot of effort, but actually quite smart and quite good at what he does.
Yeah, he's all about being underestimated.
Yeah. So a large part of this conversation revolves around Jeremy kind of making the connection between him and Rose as kind of servants to powers, basically infinite power that they could use, but it comes with a huge downside for them. To make the point to Blake that, like, it's basically saying, hey, I don't want to use all this power, but I could, but I don't want to, so please make it easier on us. It's an interesting connection. I love the idea of them really being able to win in any situation, depending on how flexible they're willing to be with their compunctions.
Yeah, I mean, although there's an interesting difference where a Diabolus kind of knows it's going to be bad because, when you call the demon, it's just not good. It's never going to be good for you or for anyone. Whereas with the Acolytes of Gods, I mean, the difference for them is they're kind of gambling. Like they're either playing it safe or they're sort of pushing the boundaries and trying to hope that they have enough favor and the god finds the situation interesting enough to bother, basically.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's like a really interesting comparison with a very subtle difference to it. I really like it, especially because we talked last episode about this sort of thing where demons and gods can kind of hurt each other and fight each other. And so it's interesting to see how people working for both of them not entirely dissimilar.
Yeah. Although I'm kind of reminded of what Faisal said, that a demon and a angel, he said, but presumably it applies to gods as well, of equal strength, the demons will win. So I don't know. Maybe the edge lies with the demons for this battle.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. We don't know how Barbatorum / Orneus / whoever stacks up compared to Dionysus. I can't imagine Dionysus is super all powerful these days, but
yeah. Just a funny line here. One of the younger satyrs references the situation and says "Jaeger bomb" and then laughs. And Blake describes it as snickering as if it were far funnier than it was. Which, I don't know, I thought it was a pretty funny joke, to be honest.
Yeah, I laughed. I thought it was funny. Maybe we're just shitty satyr humor, chumps.
we have the same sense of humor as satyrs, which I don't know what that means, but it probably isn't good. So Blake kind of has this conversation with Jeremy and then kind of throws in a few words and then just vanishes halfway through his sentence to get upstairs and run to find the Cabal. And he finds them all unconscious on the floor.
And Jeremy's right behind him and walks in and he says he's behind the glass and can't do a thing. So
yep,
everything's coming up. Jeremy, Thorburn. I guess.
Oh, yeah, sure. It's not a great situation. It seems that Jeremy has won this little fight for now. We shall see next time on Pact. But that's not the end of our show. Before we go, a quick reminder that we are currently doing a discussion question. That discussion question is this. What form do you think Molly will take as a familiar to Mags? We still haven't seen the answer to this yet, so there's time to get in your answers. We'll probably be talking about it during our next episode, which comes out in a little bit, but before then, leave your answers in the discussion thread.
Yeah. It should be two or so days after this releases before we sit down to record the next chapter, so you got a bit of time.
Yep. Again, before we go, let's do a little bonus thing. I want to talk about mermaids. Let's dive into the history of mermaids, since we've met the best character, and that is a mermaid.
Yes, this is a long overdue Monster Corner, I think.
Yes. So, Monster Corner is basically the segment where I start Googling something and then fall down a rabbit hole, and this is no different. So I started off just kind of getting all the basic facts. So, mermaids' first depictions are from Mesopotamian artwork, 18...
Oh, that's pretty far back.
Yeah, 1800 to 1500 BC. Usually mermen to start out with, actually, but mermaids did appear occasionally. And the early version of mermaids was definitely, protective. They were kind of protective figures, which I like as implications for Green Eyes. That's fun. But obviously, after that, something interesting happened to the concept of mermaids, where they kind of merged with the idea of sirens, which were a pre-existing, or not pre-existing, but a distinct mythological creature, right? So sirens were, in Greek mythology, like the Odyssey, were half woman and half bird, right? Which they are, nowadays siren and mermaid are synonyms.
Yeah, I always thought of them as the same thing. Yeah.
Right, because contemporarily they are the same thing. I mean, they're referred to as the same thing, right? And parts of kind of siren mythology have crossed over into mermaid mythology, right? Like sirens sang to, or played instruments sometimes, but mostly sang to lure sailors onto rocks and die. Which, if they were birds, kind of makes sense that they would sing, whereas it doesn't really make sense for mermaids, right?
I like how some idiot must have crashed his boat into a rock.
Yep.
Because the birds were singing, and so he had to make up a story about how they were sexy birds, and that's why he fell for it.
Yeah, sexy birds is a horrifying thought. Yeah, so this is the interesting thing. Somewhere around like medieval times, like 800 to 900 AD, sirens and mermaids really started getting mixed up. And then people kind of fell off the wagon with what a siren was. People thought they were half dragon, half woman for a while, which obviously comes from bird, and then possibly then they're like scaled half human, half some scaly creature, which then turns into fish, and then they kind of merge with the mermaids from there. And then by like 14th century, they're basically interchangeable in mythology. So sirens obviously were known to lure people, sailors, to their death on in aquatic environments. So they're not necessarily dissimilar, but this is kind of where the origin of mermaids as sirens comes from, is from this merging of two different bits of mythological, I don't know, stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's some overlap there, so that makes sense.
Yeah. So then Blake, obviously, when he meets Green Eyes, he's kind of worried that she is going to lure him into the water, which obviously is a very siren thing to do, which is interesting. I don't know. Maybe sirens and mermaids aren't as associated in Pact. Maybe they still are. Who knows?
Well, I mean, it's funny because in the world of Pact, like, it does seem like popular belief has a lot of influence over how things actually work. Like, you know, are there some 4,000-year-old mermaids that used to be sirens and they're real ticked off that everyone forgot what they used to be like and they kind of slowly got merged?
Or 4,000-year-old sirens, and they're like, we don't look like that. We're bird people. Anyway, so I'm gonna bring out some fun mermaids from around the world, because mermaid mythology is quite global. But it's not always fish, half woman, half fish, or half man, half fish. Brazilian mermaids, known as Iara, are half snake. Same as French mermaids, known as Melusine. Fun fact about Melusine, actually, or Melusine maybe is plural, maybe is singular. It depends. But if you look at the Starbucks logo, that's actually thought to be based on Melusine. If you look at the old Starbucks logo especially, it's really easy to tell. The newer one is kind of a stylized version of the old one, and it loses a lot of the, the original design ideas.
No respect for the history of Melusines.
Yeah, it's Starbucks war on Melusine, is what it is.
So when you say, like, half snake, half woman, like, but you still mean as in water-based, like, you know, these aren't like
almost always water-based, and that makes sense because obviously there are aquatic snakes, but it does seem that there was a point in mythology where basically it was a woman and a scaly something, whether that's a dragon, whether that's a snake, whether that's a fish. It kind of morphed into this woman plus scaly thing with a scaly tail, and then eventually just kind of normalized as fish.
Okay.
Just one other weird mermaid from around the world that I really liked is the Ningyo, which is the Japanese mermaid, which sometimes is depicted similar to what we would think of as a mermaid now, but originally was a giant fish with a human face and a monkey's mouth with sometimes horns and fangs, which is fucking bonkers. Thanks, Japan.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah, and if you ate them, you would get eternal youth and beauty. So all kinds of fun things. Actually, I've got a picture there, which is in our notes, but other people won't be able to see. It's horrifying, so don't scroll down, Elliot.
Oh, God. Oh.
Yeah.
Ew.
So obviously Green Eyes has a lot of overlap with mermaids, but also a lot of overlap with anglerfish. And I did a little bit of research in this. I know you've looked into anglerfish more as well, but just to quickly cover it off, obviously since mermaids are half fish, a lot of mythology will be based around mixing traditional mermaid mythology with different kinds of fish. Seemingly anglerfish is one of the most common. There's like a lot of anglerfish mermaid stuff. There's a whole kind of Tumblr tag on it that has a bunch of safe for work and some not safe for work artwork. Thanks, Tumblr. But I'd recommend checking that out. And I kind of started looking for other types of mermaid based on different fish, and I couldn't really find much. There's a few catfish mermaids, which
I'm deleting those images right now.
Yeah, I would. Some of them are terrifying. There's some cute ones as well. But I actually didn't find as many different kinds of mermaids as I would have thought. Anglerfish was quite common, but there was some catfish stuff, but there wasn't a lot of other ones. So I'd love to see more mermaid fish kind of breeds, I suppose is the word. Fish like swordfish could be quite cool, or blobfish would be fun. I think in general, fish are quite a fun little design space to play in. So send me your different types of fish mermaid fan art, I guess, is the thesis here.
Yeah, but so as you sort of alluded to, I sort of tried to specifically dive into anglerfish, because obviously that's the type of mermaid that Green Eyes is. And as you sort of mentioned, it seems to be quite popular as a sort of mermaid variety, presumably because they've got such a unique style.
Yeah,
mostly.
definitely.
But I tried to look into the symbolism and history surrounding anglerfishes specifically. There's not much. There's some like generic deep sea crap that more has to do with krakens and stuff.
Yep.
And that's because anglerfish weren't really discovered till like 120 years ago. But I did find one astrology website, Primal Astrology, which
classic.
has a sign for anglerfish. So this is clearly the only reputable astrology site online. And it has a whole page detailing the traits and personalities and relationships of people born under the anglerfish sign.
Yep, so presumably these are all ones that will apply to Green Eyes, so let's hear it.
Yes, so people of the sign anglerfish are powerful, clever, determined, and mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, I guess we'll see. They're very competitive, apparently, so I don't know, she's kind of alone right now, so I don't know if
We'll
Green Eyes
see,
will get to... They use their immense intellect to outwit others in the game of life.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the Primal Astrology compares them to professional poker players because they can keep a straight face and keep others guessing about their next move, which is very ominous in the context of Green Eyes.
Yeah, although maybe it just means she'll be really good at poker, so that could be cool.
Blake can have the Faceless Woman and the Revenant around, and the four of them.
Yeah, who's got a better poker face, the Faceless Woman or Green Eyes?
One thing they did point out is that anglerfish are mostly loners, but they do enjoy socializing from time to time. So, I mean, lucky for Green Eyes. They prefer observing others before engaging them, which actually is exactly what Green Eyes did. So, this website's very legit.
Yeah.
And when meeting a new person, will usually hesitate to share much about themselves and instead will ask questions about others, which that's what Green Eyes did.
Okay, so some of these are just kind of... it doesn't feel like astrology and more just kind of like they tried to figure out ways that they could interpret traits about the anglerfish to apply to people. You've written a note here which you skipped, which says, they prefer to use their cunning to draw others to them rather than chasing after anyone, which is just like what anglerfish do, and they've tried to apply it to social situations. Is that what this is all about? I don't know.
Well, no, it's 50% that, 50% things that are so generic that they don't really matter.
No, but it's true, and it applies to Green Eyes, so it's fair.
Yeah, like all that stuff about observing others before engaging with them. It's just
That's very
doesn't really make
specific.
sense. Yeah. So they actually have a list of famous anglerfish to finish off the article. I didn't recognize most of the people.
Mm-hmm.
I only recognize Brittany Murphy and Pablo Picasso. So make of that what you will.
I don't know
Pablo
what to make
Picasso
of that, honestly.
in the drains as an anglerfish mermaid.
We know that somebody was Green Eyes' kind of mentor and rescued her, so maybe it was Picasso. You can't say for sure that it wasn't, Elliot.
I'm locking it into the headcanon.
That will definitely be confirmed later on in the story.
I bet.
Before we just keep talking about anglerfish forever, I suppose it's time for us to wrap up this episode. As a reminder, if you want to answer the discussion question on what form Molly will take as Mags's familiar, please head to the discussion thread, which will be linked in the episode description. Or if you just want to leave us some comments, post your favourite anglerfish mermaid fan art from Tumblr, please tag all the not safe for work ones. There are a lot.
Yes, and of course, if you want more of the public to see your not safe for work anglerfish pics, hit us up on Twitter at MediaMD Podcasts.
Yes, you can check out on our Twitter the live reads. So Elliot will live read stuff, and there'll be additional discussion happening both on Twitter and on the Reddit that we don't have time to cover in the show. So it's a good place to get more of that deep impact fix that you crave.
And if you want more info on when all that stuff is happening, doofmedia.com has a calendar page that you can get to from the front page, and that'll tell you when all of that stuff is.
Have we mentioned Behamebot as well? if you're a member of the Duff Patreon, patreon.com/duffmedia, you'll gain access to the Duff Discord. And one of the parts of the Discord is there's the Bahame bot, which is a robot with some Laird Bahame fan art as its icon that will keep you posted on how long it is until different Duff things happen. So episodes of Duff shows or all kinds of different things that are happening in and around the Duff community.
Yeah, and I mean, I quite like it because it tells you how many hours until something. The calendar on our website is unfortunately limited to showing everything in Chicago time, which means basically nothing to me as an Australian.
Yep.
So it's always nice for BahameBot to tell me it's in 22 hours rather than 8 a.m. In Chicago.
Yeah. Of course, the Duff Media site has more things than just the Chicago time calendar. It has all the other great shows on the Duff Media Network, including the Duffcast. There's a new episode of the Duffcast that has just come out or is about to come out on The Happening.
Comes out exactly the same time as this episode.
There you go.
Yeah, and I mean, I watched The Happening when I was like 16 on a plane, and of course, you kind of enjoy every movie on a plane. I don't know what's with that. I've seen a lot of shit movies on planes and still love them.
Low oxygen
I think it's because
levels.
you're trapped.
Low oxygen levels. Yeah.
But anyway, I really liked it on the plane, so I can't wait to hear Scott and Matt, hopefully reaffirm that for me without me having to actually rewatch it and have that in doubt.
I mean, some people still liked The Village. Some people still liked, what was it called? Lady in the Water, right? I feel like this is the one where it's like, nobody thinks this is a good movie.
I think this is roughly around the turning point. Like, as the Doofcast moves through the Shyamalan films, I think this is the point where things in the public consensus tend to sour.
So I'm excited for Scott and Matt to finally be negative about a Shyamalan movie. Maybe. I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll enjoy Taylor Lautner and Marky Mark and the Trees, which was the original title of that movie, actually. Anyway, if you want to support other great shows like those on, like the Duffcast and other shows on the Duff Media Network, you can head to the Patreon, patreon.com/duffmedia. We've already mentioned some of the perks you get, but there are a whole bunch of them, and they're too much to list unless we want to go over an hour again, so check it out on the Patreon.
Yes, and of course, we always like to remind you, Walbo has a Patreon too. And if you're listening to this show, if you're listening to We've Got Ward, if you're reading Pact, you should throw some dollars his way if you can, because, I mean, without that Patreon, we wouldn't have these stories, and that would be not good.
Yeah, I'll say. And that's our show for today. But if you just can't wait, it's all right. We'll be back soon with episode 10.7, talking about Mala Fide 10.7. That will be on Monday, the 2nd of September.
So we'll see you then.
See ya.